elected president, there was at least one demonstration in front of our house with about 60 non-neighbors, with our neighbor friends running over to support the family. This is principally my brother Paul's recollection. Paul is here today. The demonstrators engaged in a lot of yelling and catcalling. Dad came to the front steps and listened. Paul remembers that Jack was pensive, his eyes moving around the crowd to take everything in, but calm and collected. One person stepped forward as a representative and came as far as the common sidewalk, speaking loudly enough for everybody to hear. Jack, with Virginia following, came about halfway to the walk and listened from there. He refused to respond to the race baiting and essentially said, "Thanks very much for your concern, but take it under advisement." The crowd dissipated with threats that this was just the beginning and they would return in greater numbers. There was at least one other demonstration, which we didn't recall this, but there was a demonstration which was principally black. There was a group in Austin who thought that the realty practices that had begun in the aftermath of the ordinance in Austin were unfair to the blacks who were there. So we had also a group of black demonstrators. Of course, all these events had an impact on our family. I think that when my dad was originally nominated as a trustee in 1960, I think he was one of the first candidates nominated by the VMA who was not a Protestant. And of course, with a Catholic family of 9 from the 800 block of South Kenilworth, he was a perfect balance for the ticket. With respect to the ordinance, our family's understanding was that he had proposed the ordinance and he insisted on moving it forward despite the concern on the part of others on the board, even those who supported the ordinance, that there was division not only in the electorate but on the board. And I remember one board member was opposed from the start, but I remember that Dad was surprised and disappointed when the second board member announced that that board member was against. So pressing it forward was something that even the board had its questions about because they thought it might be divisive. Finally, we understood that his arrangement with our mom was that he would end his service to the village board after 8 years as trustee so that he could help her with the work of raising the 9 of us, not that that was difficult. But when the VMA asked him to run again as president on the grounds that the ordinance might otherwise be reversed, my mother endorsed it fully. She certainly supported all of the values behind it, and with encouragement from her, he said that he would serve. All of his children are intensely proud of him, as you might imagine. I remember seeing a powerful older man years after the ordinance had passed, who introduced himself by saying that I looked as though I must be Jack's son, and that he completely disagreed with Dad about the ordinance, and that he had moved out of Oak Park on that account, but that he always respected the way Dad had handled himself during the difficult times. So it was wonderful to hear that. Friends of ours and friends of our families, like Joe Scully, have said that the Oak Park would not have become what it now is without him. On a personal level, I would say that he was remarkable even to his children. I have observed with at least one of my siblings that most of us have a little too much of Virginia's fire and spirit to have done things in exactly the way that he did. He was always calm and reasonable, especially under pressure, and he always did the right thing with very little fanfare. In the context of the high-tension environment of early 1968 in Oak Park, he really could not have been better suited to provide the great service to the village that he did. Thanks again on behalf of all the Garens for letting me say a few words. Congratulations to the VMA on your many years of service. I enjoyed being a precinct captain for you in the early days. I know what important work. In 1 year. Yeah. I know what important work it is. Congratulations to the VMA trustees. We're delighted that you're back on the 1-year anniversary of the reestablishment of the VMA slate. We're grateful for all the work you're doing for the village. We look forward to many more years. Finally, as Barack's recent speech reflects, the issue of race in the U.S. is a continuing challenge, not the work of a single day, however heroic. And sustaining an integrated community like Oak Park is beautiful and rewarding, but it's also a constant work. So, to all of you who I know have been an important part of that effort, the tip of the brim, if you will.
What John didn't mention was that his father's campaign office is now the office for the Wednesday Journal. Jim McClure.
Great to be here, the only living president. I want to go back a little bit, even before the adoption of the zoning ordinance. My wife and Lee Brook were on the same citizen committee that was mentioned in the glossary. I was the lawyer for the straw buyer that the Robinets used to get a house. Oak Leaves has an article about this, and they've got something wrong. The reason we needed a straw buyer was that when you had a white buyer who would come in and then at the closing would turn the house over to the black buyer, the mortgage companies found a way to beat that, and they made the buyers, when they signed their contract to have a mortgage, to sign an affidavit that they would live in the house. That made it impossible to do it at the closing. So we realized we'd have to have a real closing. We'd have to purchase it in the white buyer's name. And the Reverend Donald Beiswinger, a Presbyterian minister, was my candidate. And he bought the house, and he closed the deal, and he turned the house over to the Robinet. He signed the affidavit because, as a minister, he felt the greater good was there by blocking this kind of evil. And I think all of us now would agree with him. I want to mention the many contributions of John Donaker and John Guerin. John Donaker was the one conducting the hearings, and he had his life threatened for the fact that 10,000 people didn't want it. John Guerin was the calming voice that got the next board in motion to carry on. He moved the village hall to its present location. It was an attempt to keep Eastern Oak Park alive and well. And then I came along in 1973. I didn't even have an opponent. People were so afraid of what was going to happen to Oak Park that you couldn't sell a house in East Oak Park at that time. It was really a troublesome time. And we had a wonderful board. My campaign manager sitting at the end of the table. We had only two candidates, two trustees, the doctor and Mr. McDonald. And they weren't serious opponents. We lacked a really serious campaign. But we had a major job, and we were determined to keep diversity the goal. That diversity statement came out of a joint venture of all of us. Gene Callahan, probably the author originally, and it's what we've lived by since. But I'm worried about some things, and I want to talk about them as a conclusion of what I'm saying. Barack gave us the platform saying that race is something we've got to deal with. And I want to give you some advice on how to deal with it. First of all, you have to adopt what Barack says you have to do. You have to listen to the other side. John was a good one like that. He always listened to opponent. The VMA